Central Time. So I'd like to welcome folks. I'm sure more will be joining us coming into the waiting room. I'm Dan Taranko, welcoming you from Nashville, Greenlands, where intentional community practices regenerative agriculture. And also from Tennessee Alliance for Progress, our primary sponsoring organization of the New Green Compass Conference. And we've been meeting all week on various topics. And this is also, we're not just watchers, we want you all to be doers. And so we're learning to do. And our other two primary sponsors, the Nashville Peace and Justice Center and the Wendland Cook Program in Religion, Labor, and Ecology, plus around 20 community-based organizations that are co-sponsors. Just a few things on your Zoom. If you're not familiar with Zoom, at the top right corner, there's a view button. You can press that and go to speaker view, which you'll probably want to do for the speakers. You will be muted unless you're called upon for some reason. And finally, we are going to be recording. And so if you don't want to see your face blasted across the country, you probably want to stop your video down in the left corner. So I'm just going to turn it over now to Aaron, my next door neighbor, and he's going to be facilitating today's wonderful workshop. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Dan. And that's right. Yeah, I'm Aaron Stauffer. I'm the postdoctoral fellow at the Wendland Cook Program in Religion and Justice at Vanderbilt Divinity School, also a member of Nashville Greenlands. So this is a really important panel and conversation topic to me personally. Just a little bit of information about the Wendland Cook Program. We work in the areas of religion and justice at Vanderbilt Divinity School, studying and investigating and organizing around the intersection of religion, economics, and ecology. We were founded in 2019 by Dr. Jörg Rieger, who's a distinguished professor at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And I'd really encourage you all to check out some of our recent work and webinars around liberating people on the planet, where we explore the relationship of ecological devastation and climate change and how that's connected to people's movements for liberation. We've got a really wonderful panel today to have a conversation on regenerative agriculture. So I'm going to quickly introduce them and get out of the way. So our first panelist here is Jim Embry, who's the director of Sustainable Communities Network. Jim considers himself stardust congealed in human form that represents billions of years of Earth's revolution. As an evolutionary being, his purpose is to contribute to a paradigm shift towards sacred Earth consciousness, and refers to himself as a sacred Earth activist. As an activist, Jim has participated in the most major social justice movements of his era, and now believes that the sustainability movement encompasses all other movements. He's the founder and director of the Sustainable Communities Network, and he seeks to contribute to the theory and practice of sustainable living. Next on our panel is Qiana Mickie, who's the founding principal of QJM Multiprise. She's a New York City-based food activist and food systems leader, and a speaker that uses food as a driver of enterprise, innovation, and equity. Over a decade of experience, she has worked in fostering a food-based solidarity economy in the New York region, and increases and that to the end that farm-based solidarity economy increases farm viability, health food access, and leadership opportunities for small and mid-scale regional farmers, youth, Black, brown, mixed income, and other communities of color. Qiana also brings an equity-driven lens to her local, state, federal, and international policy work on issues such as food sovereignty, land tenure, and health. Qiana recently transitioned from the executive director role to become of Just Foods New York, from an organization called Just Foods in New York City. And now she's the special projects consultant at Just Food in spring 2020. Following Qiana is Tim Van Meter. Tim is an associate professor at the Methodist School of Theology in Ohio, and he leads the ecology and justice specialization at a consortium of at a program that includes a number of different degrees, an MDiv, an MAPT, DMin, and other Masters of Arts in Social Justice. He serves as the campus coordinator for the Ecological Initiative. And what's really unique about this is that Methodist School of Theology in Ohio has a 10-acre organic farm called Seminary Farm, or Seminary. Dining hall resourcing, 85% from local to organic to humane sources, a solar array and closed loop geothermal for primary academic buildings, and MTSO has hosted multiple events exploring ecology and interfaith dialogue. So Tim has been a part of all of this work. In 2017 to 2019, he served as a director for a grant from the Luce Foundation, Luce Fund for Theological Education, in partnership with the Green Seminaries Initiative, led by Green Faith and the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, supporting 1 to 3 day events on campuses across the US. So we're really happy to have Tim with us. And last, but certainly not least, is Zach Wolf. Zach manages the Caney Fork Farms in Carthage, Tennessee. With his team, he helps steward and study over 800 acres of diversified farmland. The Caney Fork Farms holds multiple certifications, including with the Real Organic Project. The farm raises grass-fed cattle and sheep, pastures pork, organic vegetables, hay, row crops, and chestnuts. Zach grew up in the Northeast with his first introduction to agriculture as a teenager at the Whippoorwill Farm, excuse me. He has worked over the last decade as a farmer, educator, and consultant. So we really have just a wonderful panel set up for us. And I'm excited to kind of enter into this conversation. By way of doing that, I'd like to kind of create space for each of them to bring themselves into the room. And so I'd like to start with Zach and ask them how he got involved in the regenerative agriculture or the solidarity economy movement. I wondered, Zach, if you could tell us a little bit about how your current work continues to live out that.
Well, thank you, Aaron. And I feel just honored to be on this panel with these people and a little underqualified. So I'm going to try to speak as much as I can just about the experiences I know are relevant, or I hope are relevant. But to answer your question, you know, it relates back to that first experience that you mentioned at the end of my bio at Whippoorwill Farm. And it was sort of a combination of heartbreak and love that led me into farming. You know, sort of heartbreak of, I'd say, being a rural person, but feeling estranged from a rural place, being surrounded by farmland as a child, but not understanding what farming was or meant to our community and to my quality of life. And I think later, you know, as I got into farming, realizing how heartbroken I was as a kid to sort of have to grow up in that experience and not feel as connected to the place that I loved and that was supporting me as I was craving to be connected to. And so I was blessed early on to have a few mentors in my life, but one in particular that kind of took me under his wing at different periods of my life and gave me sort of the nuts and bolts introduction to agriculture. And that was about 20 plus years ago. Yeah. And I feel like at Caney Fork Farms, I'm still trying to figure out what that even means. Like how to create a farm that would maybe live into the model of what I experienced as a teenager on that particular farm, which was one in which it fit very well into its place, in which it felt like an expression of the family that was holding stewardship and commitment to that land, and a farm that really supported the community that supported it in reciprocity. All of those things were realized at that farm for me at a young age. And I feel like my whole journey through agriculture has been trying to basically recreate farms like that, stumbling along the way. And I'd say we're still sort of in the initial stages of that here at Caney Fork Farms.
Wonderful, thanks for that. I think it's just super relatable. People finding themselves at, you know, both sort of like bitterness and also like possibility, right, of sort of some of the displacement that you've talked about. I really appreciate that. And those roles of mentorship are so crucial. Qiana, I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this work.
Yeah, so I wrote a few points just to make sure I stay on track, but I have to say, between like what Jim shared with us before, and then also like before we started, and then also mentioning like how we're made of stardust, and then how Zach started, like I am definitely in my feelings right now, so I might get a little bit emotional between now. Oh God, I'm getting, the older I get, the more emotional I get. Okay,
yeah,
I'm gonna try to pull it together.
We're whole people. We are here. This is great.
Yeah, you know, so I'm gonna put that aside, but try to stay on track. The practicality of my trajectory is not linear, and I think oftentimes the way we find ourselves in this work isn't. And I, usually have like a more practical, pragmatic way of like explaining it. But, when I really kind of think about it, and what like Zach, I think is like touching why I'm getting like sensitive, is that, I think that there were, I kind of come from a place of like two different worlds oftentimes. My dad is from Richmond, Virginia, from the country. Many years of, land, being family on that land, but I didn't grow there. I only grew there from birth to 2.5. So some of my earliest memories come from that time. So I know they are very special to me, with my great grandmother, and even things I would do when I would go visit, like run out and get like tomatoes, and just how different it tastes when I grew up in the city. And most of my life was in New York City. And yet, if somebody had asked me like years ago, would you work in food or have been in food? It was never part of like, I thought, my story. And yet I see so much of those pieces as a part of me, in terms of the connection to my family and connection to land, even before I really had a way in words. And I think that connection between the food and being up with my grandmother and my great grandmother, and baking, and the stories that she would share really do root me. And then ironically, my first job ever was with the Council of Environment of New York City. And I was like pruning and weeding it, like community gardens. Again, I literally just found it in the phone book. I was like, I want a job. And they were the one group that said, yes, they had summer programming. So, I never really tell that part of the story, but I think in these ways, it really did bring me here, and how it connects to regenerative agriculture. And I think what really spoke to me as I was getting older and trying to find my way, I had done work in nonprofits, and I wasn't working at the time. And I started to not be well, and I started to exercise more, but I started to notice the foods that I was eating was no longer really sitting with my body. And at the same time, my son was younger, and we had moved to Harlem. And so all these kind of pathways, kind of the desire to help community, learn stuff about myself, started to really connect to food. And I really had to unpack it from there. And it led me to Just Food. I was volunteering in the community, and somebody had mentioned that they were having a community advocacy course, and they wanted me to take it so I could bring those lessons back around food justice to our space. And that really opened the door to policy. And I started to see the connection between justice, food, not just what we consume as an individual, but how it connects us to our community. And then this really deeper connection to systemic change. And it started to then parallel the ways I wanted to engage. And that's really where I guess I always thought my start was, but I think my start really started way long ago. And I think now I really see that my work is around connecting the dots. So when we talk about solidarity economy, we're talking about the intersectionality of our social and political, natural and financial environment, our agriculture environments, and how we can't live like they're in silos. And if we, you know, if we actually are building regenerative economies rooted in regenerative agriculture, then we're actually living in and being respectful to the land, and it will be here for generations to come. And so for me, I see like, if those are the intersectionalities, my work is really rooted in the connective tissue of that, and how to hold the lessons learned, not just my lived experience, but lessons of our ancestors, lessons of resilient practices, and how do we bring that together to build solidarity, to really move us forward so we can, you know, be well here and be whole, and really then speak to how we need to divest from the extractive and exploitation that we've grown up so much to. And that's kind of where I see my work is now, is, you know, first shifting throughout an organization that was rooting through justice, and now working as a consultant to work with different groups, community and nonprofits and otherwise, to really, again, be that connective tissue to really shift and build transformative change with others.
Thank you for that. I think it's really great. Already we're seeing how it is your own stories between Qiana's and Zach's are really rooted in some of the same questions, right? How do we build farms and economies that help create whole communities that withstand some of the threats that they're under? And so I think that's wonderful. And it's totally relatable to me that the stories are not linear. Oftentimes we find ourselves being called or pushed in different directions. So that's wonderful. Tim, I wonder if you can bring yourself a little bit into the room. How did you get involved in this movement? Yeah.
Be happy to. So I was born in California, but grew up in Southern Indiana in farmland. We didn't have a farm, but my dad, you know, we didn't have a farm. We only had an 1.5 acre garden, which is, you know, was small compared to my Uncle Kenny's garden that was 5 acres. And so that's how we grew up. But I came to MTSO as a professor at Methodist Theological School in Ohio in 2006. And in 2008, either spring of 08 or fall of 08, I taught the first class on ecology and religious education. It was a way to slip ecology into the curriculum. And on the first day, 2 times during the semester, about once a month, and on the last day, we walked our campus. And I would ask our students about how are we using our land. And we are at that time were 78 acres. Now we're really close to 100. We actually bought the farm next to us when it went up for sale. And I would talk about that, and we would read The Evolution of Lawns. We would read The Tragedy of the Commons. We read a lot of Wendell Berry, a lot of Wes Jackson, and that kind of work. And I would ask students, how are we using our land? And typically during that time, we would, mowers, inevitably, because it's a college campus, mowers and blowers would start just hanging. And we're a relatively progressive school, and so the students would hear the professor cuss a blue streak for quite a while about that, and maybe even threaten to get a bag of sugar and pour it into the gas tanks of the mower. A little monkey wrenching there. But over the course of that, I taught that course one spring, and then 18 months later, and students, we began to talk about the land, and I said, this is a waste. And students began to agree that it was a waste. And at the time, our president had an open door policy. And I would say, I have very little power in these conversations, but students have a lot of power. And if you think we ought to use our campus differently, use that open door. And to the credit, I mean, a professor could come up with all kinds of crazy ideas, but to his credit, our president, Jay Rundell, listened to the students, listened to us. And after a few years, we decided to start a farm. We're 6 years in. Last year, we had about 300 CSA shares over the course of the season, produced about 75,000 pounds of food. Our dining hall is 85 to 90% local, humane, organic. Almost all of our greens and a lot of our vegetables come straight from the farm. With the pandemic, we've been shut down for that, but we're now having our chefs, and we do have 2 real chefs who want to work farm to table, are producing 2 lunches a week for us now that we can go and pick up, take home, and also some soups. We've got relationships with about 15 to 20 local farms. We don't want to put other farms out of business. We actually want to be customers for them. And the other thing that's happened that's been really exciting, I'll say more later, is significant relationships and partnerships with colleagues at Ohio State University, Otterbein, Ohio Wesleyan, Ohio Northern, other universities, undergraduate programs that saw us as doing something interesting and key. I sit on the steering committee for the Agroecosystems Management Program at Ohio State University School of Agriculture. And very often, rightfully so, land grant institutions have led the charge in the wrong direction and done, not rightfully so, they've been blamed for that because they are responsible for that. But there are pockets of people within these institutions that are shifting the focus in a very different direction. So I'm happy to be in a relationship with those folks and working with them. In my own work, right now I'm starting a sabbatical, and I hope to actually connect with the folks on this panel after the sabbatical, because I want to talk to farmers about why you do this. What's the meaning behind it? Why do you sacrifice so much to do things that are really significant? And one of my professors at Embry was a gentleman named James Fowler, who talked about stages of faith. And for Jim Fowler, faith was not this constructed system of belief, but it was the human search for meaning. And so how are folks making meaning out of this work is really important to me. It's a great place to be, an exciting place to be. Zach's walked our farm with us. Mary Berry walked the farm with us. A few other folks have walked it. And we've had a couple really cool conferences and around this. So I'll say more later. That's how I got into it.
Thank you, Tim. That was really important. Jim, I wonder if you might bring us home on this. We've spent a fair amount of time introducing you all, but this is crucial to building the sort of relational culture that we need to build this time. I wonder if you might bring us home and introducing.
Wonderful, wonderful, what a blessing. I just want to appreciate all of the folks who've organized this Compass conference. And I want to appreciate and thank all the people who are listening in from all around the world, of course. I am sitting here on our family farm, about 30 acres. Our farm is bathed by the Kentucky River watershed. It's nourished by the soil that's heavily mineralized in limestone. And our farm also sits at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. This land, this region was once inhabited by the indigenous Cherokee people. So I'm just honoring those folks as I sit here. But I have always been involved in the regenerative agriculture and solidarity movement because I've been blessed to have been born into a family and community culture of what I call people who were agrarian, intellectual activists. My ancestors came here around the year 1800. They came right near here where our farm is right now. As enslaved people, we had three great-grandfathers that were part of what's called the U.S. colored troops and fought in the Civil War. Now, when we reviewed their military records, they were all listed as farmers. One of their sons went to what's called here in Kentucky, Berea College in 1879. He was there just a few years before Carter G. Woodson, who is the founder of what we now, this month of Black History Month. That great-grandfather, D.B. Ballou, helped organize the Black Teacher Association. He was a leader in the Black Farmer Cooperative. Both of those associations invited to Kentucky, to Richmond, Kentucky, a few miles from where our farm is now, in 1919 and a few years as well after that, the likes of W.E.B. Du Bois, Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, and one of the fathers of regenerative agriculture, George Washington Carver. That's part of my family lineage. I don't know any better, okay? Around 1972, I helped found what's called our Good Foods, Natural Foods Cooperative. We found it based upon 3 pillars, 3 legs: local food, organic food, and healthy food. So we were already into what we now call sustainability back in the 70s. Now, I'm going to turn forward a few pages. The question was, what's the current work now? Well, just 2 weeks ago, okay, I was on a tractor seeding about 12 acres of our farm as a pollinator habitat. And right now I'm getting into our hoop house. I'm a keeper of bees. I'm checking on my bees and getting ready to put things in the ground here in a week or so. But now also just recently, back in December, I was on the panel with my beloved friend, Jeff Poppin, Barefoot Farmer, Tennessee Local Food Summit. In October, I was on a panel with Vice President Al Gore, Greg Asbett, Immokalee Workers, Brother Heber Brown from Baltimore, Black Church Food Justice Coalition. So I wear a variety of hats. I'm just blessed to be here.
Thank you for that. And that's, I know you've got a rich and deep history and in this work. So that was indeed a very quick overview that was really important, and what a history to be connected to. I wonder if you can continue this conversation, Jim. Just to the next question that I have for us as a group is, how is your work now about more than cultivating sustainable agricultural practices and systems, right? So how are you building relationships of solidarity with other movements? This is a sort of intersectional question that all of you have addressed, but I want to hear a little bit more detailed and maybe some examples of it.
Absolutely. Well, again, part of my family legacy, my mother, following in this tradition, was the president, what was called the Congress of Racial Equality in 1959. I was 10 years old. My brother was 13 years old. So I was on picket lines, weigh-ins, demonstrations, sit-ins at 10 years old in the civil rights movement. So my evolution as I call it a leader in the civil rights and even, the Black student, Black power movement has given me the sensibility to connect with all the various movements. Over the past 60 years, I've been involved in, the anti-war movement, environmental movement, women's movement, gay and lesbian movement, disability movement, labor movement, and so forth. And it's been my blessing again to try to connect the dots, connect all these dots. And as you mentioned in the intro, now I feel that the global movement around sustainability connects all these various movements. I've been involved, for example, in questions around women in particular, healing from domestic violence, drug and alcohol addiction, and things like that. And we've been using gardening and agriculture and touching the soil, which we're all made from, as part of that healing process. I've worked around what we call restorative justice with people who are veterans, people who have suffered war trauma, say leaving the war-torn areas in, say, in Rwanda, Burundi, who've come to Kentucky. I've worked with people who are incarcerated and who are trying to work through that situation and come out, and we've helped restore them to community. We've worked in the county jails, state penitentiaries. I've worked with young people who've been troubled in a variety of ways, using gardening. We had a program with the family court judge with kids and adults who are in drug court. So again, I've been blessed to have traveled globally to link up with the MST Movimento Central in Brazil. I've been to Cuba to study organic agriculture. I have marched and supported United Farm Workers and Farm Labor Organizing Committee and Immokalee Workers. I've been involved in Black farmer cooperatives and Black urban growers and Black organic farmers and Slow Food USA, and again, just a whole host of various organizations, whether they are local in my own county throughout Kentucky, throughout the state in a variety of ways. Nationally, I've been involved, internationally, and intergalactically. Maybe one day I'll be that as well.
That's right. Well, there's always room to grow, right? Is that the is that it? That is an impressive list. I really appreciate that. Zach, I wonder, perhaps for those of us in Tennessee, more local context, if you could reply to that question, how is your work at the Caney Fork Farms, how is it building relationships of solidarity with other movements?
Well, first, I have a very living picture from everything that Jim just shared, not only from like all of the past that he brought us through in his piece of land, but to like everything that, I mean, Jim, I think you need to write a book, like what, 2 books, maybe. One is on the history of everything you just covered. And then the second is how to be such a productive human being. Because as you're listing all these things, I'm like, oh my,
good food helps.
How does one do so much? But obviously through inspiration. Yeah, so I mean, I can talk about maybe the tangible and the intangible aspects to that question. And I think this would be it seems like it's the right group to talk about some of the intangible or harder to describe or maybe more qualitative aspects to this work. But to ground it a little bit more, so we're based in Carthage, Tennessee. We're about an hour east of Nashville, about 50 miles. And that conference that Jim was referencing was actually hosted here on the farm back in October. This is the family farm of former Vice President Al Gore. And we have a CSA, so we connect through the local community, both here in Carthage and then extend out into Nashville and beyond. And you can order some of our products online, like our chestnuts that come in the fall can be ordered online, and we ship those all over the country. So there's an immediate connection, right? Just the food that's coming off of this land is connected into these places. But in terms of other movements, we have one solid connection with Vanderbilt, actually, and they're rooted in community program. And we're working with them to help get our food out to more people, and more people that wouldn't otherwise have access or even the knowledge necessarily yet to know how to work with that food. And that partnership has sort of strengthened the way that we think about our work overall. And we're moving into a new phase of that partnership where we're actually researching and trying to ask more questions about how would a farm like ours actually reach more communities than someone who would have the wherewithal to go onto our website and order our chestnuts or anything like that. I'd say another piece of connection is actually to the scientific community. So we host a research program here on the farm. It's focused mainly on soil carbon and how this type of farming impacts rates of soil carbon sequestration, which I use the term sequestration, and I don't like the term, but it's a term that's been used and maybe understood by people. It's how carbon accumulates in the soil. But a friend of mine once said that the translation of sequestration is to kidnap something, to capture it. And so it's this very aggressive sort of imagery of what we're doing to the carbon. And instead, we need to start thinking of the carbon as how it enters the life body of the farm, how it enters the living being of the farm, how it enters cycles in the farm that can be sort of kept and maintained and enhanced. And so all of the way that we're farming is attempting to do that. And the carbon is sort of one way, one tangible measure of maybe good work. And so the more carbon, the more good work on this piece of land. The research program, there's one other aspect that I want to mention, which is it's not only working with people that are already expert in research, but it's trying to train researchers in how to ask the right research questions, which is something that I think we take for granted right now, right? Like the general public is sort of out there and the research comes out and the publications come out and they become like our sources of light, our sources of truth. And I'm of the belief that that's very important, and that's maybe how science should be viewed, especially during the pandemic, right? We understood how important science is to guide policy and how dangerous it is when science isn't guiding policy. That's not a jab, but this other layer of it is like, well, how do the scientists understand what questions to ask and how to ask them? And there's this big disconnect now that many people would speak to it, which is between the scientific community, those people doing the research, and what's actually happening on farms, and how farms like Jim's, the farm that he just described, right, that's been maybe a couple centuries in formation and has a direction and has all of these relationships that are so complex. How does one actually study those farms and document them, and in a tangible way, maybe quantify their importance, but also qualify their importance? Yeah, and so that's something that we're engaging in by just bringing young scientists into the farm and fully integrating them into the work that we're doing here.
You know, I would add just a quick note, if I can, about our farm. Our farm is part of a community. Across from our farm is our family neighborhood church, right across the street. Baptismal were done in the pond on our farm. Down the street was a school that was formed after the Civil War. So our farm was part of a community. Just wanted to mention that.
Well, that's directly related to Zach's personal story, yes. Right? The relationship between farm and community is basic here, elemental. Qiana or Zach, I want to create space for you guys to jump in on some of these. I see you nodding along to some of these points.
Oh yeah, when Zach said that important pivot around, you know, who is asking the right questions and where the research is coming from and who's doing the research, and training new folks to do is so critical and so important. And I'm a big part of my work that I'm hoping to continue to evolve this year. And, you know, and it speaks to solidarity movements, is how, you know, going from a time of doing work that was community-based mostly, in connection to our rural farmers in the Northeast region, doing work in policy, which can sometimes feel very esoteric. What I've started to see, the more I was doing, you know, whether it was running the organization Just Food, was like how important data was, but also how dominant culture and academia was informing our impacts and our research and data. So meaning like community-based work, you know, work of folks of color, work of impacted folks. So it wasn't even just how intrusive it can be at times, but how it wasn't even capturing all the times the stories that we wanted to tell or the evidence that we wanted to lift up and share, whether it was to speak to broader policy changes and implementations, or even just information data to build stronger grants. And something that when I kind of transition out of my work at Just Food, I really wanted to start making more connections. It's not my wheelhouse, research and evaluation, but really wanting to find ways to find the intersection, find folks that are either to build data and design and mechanisms that can connect and meet people where they're at. So in particular, community gardeners or urban gardeners, are there tools that are relevant to them that they can use immediate data in the ways that they want? And it's not taxing to them to compile that info, but are we able to build mechanisms or increase some of the data on the back end where we're doing the burden of the work to then help leverage and aggregate that data to then have build bigger maybe policy implications or ways that we can galvanize and organize with ourselves. But again, are we the researchers? Are we building the work? Are we building the data set? So we're not just addressing what academia tells us what our crops are or what our poundages are, or what our volumes are, but also like do we have climate resiliency in what we're doing? Is the community happy with what we're sharing? Are we evolving the crops that we're growing to speak to climate and to speak to community benefit? And so these are some of the projects like Farming Concrete that I'm hoping to continue to explore and expand. There's a crowdsourcing, and I can share that link, available that folks are able to use. It's been around for years, but some of the farmers that I've been working with, we've been talking about how to build on to that and take it to another phase, because I see how important community-driven solutions are, not just in praxis, but how we decide what our data sets are, what our metrics are, what our standards are. and evolve that and find ways to speak to equity, whether it's racial, economic, and environmental, for ourselves, by ourselves, and then how we can use that information together with other work to really speak to leveraging our collective power. So it's not just amplifying our voice, it's not just amplifying what we're doing in our community or even in our region, but how do we also do that together in solidarity to push or to show how important it is for us to divest from these extractive economies, extractive growing practices that our nation has been rooted in, and that there are genuine ways from the ground up that we can. And yeah, so sorry, I've been talking a lot, but
Nope.
yeah, I just, and I think that there's an intersection between data, policy, growing, and community leadership. And that some of that, not unknown space, but some of these spaces, especially in communities of color, where we don't always have or see, to find ways to really build that with each other and learn. We don't have to always reinvent the wheel. I think oftentimes there's work and experience from ancestors and other partners in other spaces across the nation, Indigenous folks, Black folks. And I think we oftentimes think we figured something new. So it's really finding the ways to really genuinely connect with each other, to learn how you grew and how you are measuring, and how we can leverage that work and then information together.
Thank you for that. I think that's exactly right on. I mean, I think one of the takeaways that I'm getting from this really important reflection you're giving us is just the importance of giving agency and power to the community, that is to the community, and not to corporate elite or to academic elite who are driving these questions. And that is a really wonderful next kind of transition, that if I can turn it to Tim now on that question, right? So how is it that you can build, and how is it that the regenerative agricultural movement can build food solidarity against the corporate colonization of the movement, right?
Yes.
And I think that the last thing on this, corporate colonization is not just big agriculture, it's also big universities.
Yes, it's also meat alternatives. Believe it or not, it's also multiple ways that people seed their food dollars to corporate entities. And so the biggest way that agriculture, small agriculture, and every one of these words is colonized. If you read some of the new ag policy coming out, regenerative is already colonized by larger agricultural entities. But folks in this space and their communities can begin by actually meeting and knowing their farmer. It's a slogan, but it's a true slogan. If you buy from folks who are building the quality of soil and not treating soil as if it is one more resource to be mined, not being extractive, as Qiana said, then that's a beginning choice. Farmers who believe that their work begins with soil and with their communities, and aren't focused on just the production through artificial means, which include artificial fertilizers. I mean, one of the things, there's two stories I'll tell. One are friends of mine who farm and do really good work, good farming, who talk about people coming to their stands saying, "Oh, I'd love to buy from you, but you have animals and I'm a vegan," which please remain vegan. Do not change your diet, but support the farmer in building the healthiest soil possible through animal and other inputs that has a long-term, where you can have a farm like Jim's that can be generational. And what Zach's doing there and what we're trying to do with us. The other thing I want to talk about is it's not just colonization of food and our food dollars, it's also a way to keep human beings separate. So one of our key commitments that we have is to fight the racist underlying theologies of our culture. And so the primary theology of Western culture is white supremacy. It's not Christianity, it is white supremacy. Read a book like The Christian Imagination by Willie James Jennings, and think about what he's calling to mind when the purchase of land and the purchase of people were deeply intertwined. and what that means. And so to kind of push back against this, this culturally is not just growing methods, but also the ability to support a diverse group of farmers. One of the places we're stepping into, because we have a farmer who's just kind of taken control over our operations and has about 40 years experience, we're committed now to try to seek ways to train more farmers, particularly persons of color, and to not focus in on that we are committed to selling our food at markets that serve underserved communities, but not undercutting the prices of our neighbors who are also selling next to us, because we have a distinct advantage. And also to be in solidarity with workers. We have a long history of working with the Immokalee workers, because Wendy's headquarters is 8 miles from our campus. And one of the people who was really instrumental in helping get this farm started and insisted on anti-racist work was a young guy who started Franklinton Farms, which is now the largest urban farm in Columbus, Ohio. A dear friend, conversation partner throughout this work all along. And I can't talk about this without talking about Patrick Kaufman, who passed away 2 years ago from cancer at age 43. And he was just a key conversation partner who was going to be who shaped this work, but refused for us to be for the farm to be this experiment, like it is on so many college campuses or even some theological schools, where they tout what they're doing, but it's really just it's just a garden. So how do we, in our ways, leverage our work, our food, to be anti-racist, to shift what it means to feed people? And we're working with some of our alums to think about different ways of being a market. It is not part of the corporate system of food, is how large corporations dump food into food pantries. And we then give people diabetes and heart disease and all those things through our good work of charity. And so we kill people with the food we give them, while we're trying to make sure they don't go hungry. And if you want me to really get wound up, I can start getting radical, but I haven't really, started yet. So I'll stop there.
Well, Tim, I think even just this transition away from a charity model is just such an incremental but important step for so many religious congregations. And I do want to mention that tomorrow there will be a panel on religion, labor, and ecology that might address a little bit of that, and particularly the role of religious congregations. So that's a place, if people are hungry for that conversation, that people should turn to. And I'll say more about that panel later. Friends, I know we've got a time here, and we've got a great chat going. I really appreciate everyone who's in this room participating in the chat. Several of you have taken it to answer some of the other questions that your peers have asked here. So that's really wonderful. I do kind of want to get at one final question that I've got for the panelists, and then we'll open it up for other questions. So if you have got something burning on your mind, please put it into the chat, and we'll turn to it if we can. The final question here is, I'd like to start again with Jim. Is that question about what the biggest challenges and opportunities are that farmers face and networks of farmers face when seeking to shift to more sustainable practices like regenerative agriculture? So, what are the challenges and opportunities?
Okay, well, I'm going to let my other dual panel members offer some more practical ideas around this question of challenges and opportunities. I would like to be more philosophical. For me, some of the biggest challenges are that we have to shift our worldview. Our worldview is, in general, is called this Newtonian Cartesian view of the world, developed some 500 years ago, that proclaimed that the earth was a machine. The earth was a resource to be mined, commodified, industrialized. And what we need is a shift away from that way of thinking, because all of our universities, as Tim has talked about, educational systems are based upon that kind of world view of things being separate, disconnected, and not truly interdependent. So what we need is a shift in thinking that is a composite, in my view, of quantum thinking that says We're all interrelated. We're all interconnected. We're all from the very same source. Marry that, if you will, with what I might call indigenous culture and wisdom. And by the way, we're all indigenous to the earth, and we all come from historically indigenous cultures. So this idea of just bringing together this quantum science, if you will, which is the new science we haven't really adopted yet, based upon systems thinking, and we couple that with what I call indigenous culture and wisdom. And in North America and Turtle Island, that is vital. People who've been here for 30,000 years, 40,000 years, have a sensitivity to the land, to the soil, to the earth that we need to become more familiar with, where they say that we're all interrelated. We're all one people, whether it's human people, rock people, plant people, animal people, air people, water people, and so forth. That's the kind of challenge that we need to present to farmers and everyone. And echoing, my dear friend Wendell Berry, who says eating is an agricultural act. So in my view, we need to shift to say that every aspect of the food and ag system is a spiritual practice, whether it's the production of food, harvesting of food, distribution of food, marketing of food, eating of food, and even the disposal of food. On our farm, we got all kinds of things going on, composting, worm bins, and so forth. Kids come out, we do farm tour. I say, hey, composting is a spiritual practice. So how often do faith institutions talk about things like that? Opportunity is, as we shift, then we are able to contribute to this greater paradigm shift, what Joanna Macy calls the great turning. We're able to contribute to the maturation of humans as a species, okay? And lastly, agriculture and food represent for me this fulcrum point, this pivotal point that can then serve as inspiration for the transformation of all our other human institutions.
Thank you for that. I think the philosophical here is, getting at concept shifts, framework shifts is just basic to this work. I see Qiana unmuted herself, and I also want to make space for Zach here.
Yeah, I'm just so happy to be here, and I'm really happy you're sharing what you're sharing, Jim, because I think oftentimes in our conversations around agriculture and work, we forget how rooted it is in spirituality. And I think we're just at a point where we can no longer do that. We really have to shift the paradigms. We really have to shift our narratives, our framework, and not always be minimized to sound like it's esoteric or it's not practical to what we're doing or relevant to the concrete things and how it shows up in the land. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, because if we don't, we've seen what happens. And I think what we're seeing in these crises, climate crisis, financial crisis, social, racial uprisings, we keep telling ourselves that these are flare-ups. No, these are true flags of capitalist colonialism, white supremacy, and how they hold us and how they oppress from, farm to fork, from labor to land, where we then, it's taken so long and we're still even not there to shift from thinking of working in models where we build wealth and resources on the backs of people. And we keep redefining it, or we keep calling it something else. We keep building policies with different words and language, and kind of like what Timothy's saying, co-opting what is really, hard to us. And we have to have this continual fight of reclaiming. But I think instead of it always being an intellectual fight, we really have to push and really see what it is, and stop calling it, and stop trying to find ways to reknit or go back to normal. And we really have to push ourselves to see, if we're really being clear and honest with ourselves, our corporate ag system, our capitalist system is not only, extractive and exploitative, but it's fragile. It's the system and structure and system that's fragile. It's the one that will not survive. It will not feed us here. It's not going to feed others in other countries. And we keep trying to tell ourselves that. We keep having these intellectual, you know, I just think about all the policy calls that I'm on internationally and all the different reports. And it's just like, I can't even anymore. It's all kind of BS in the sense of what is true is what we know to be true is the resilient practices of ourselves and of our people and of our agriculture and how we should be holding land in stewardship and not always seeking how to be owners of it or see it as property or trying to find ways to mitigate how we, you know, call, you know, the commodity of labor and being okay with that and then trying to skip it or forget it. And in fact, just say like, we're here, we've always been here. And we keep saying it's too spiritual or there's no report on that. And instead really practice and be here and start, you know, even in the realm of policy and work, there's so many of our work and so much of our collective work that is moving there. We need to start really seeing ourselves as the most impacted to become the most activated in our policy, in our change, because we can't really divest from that. It impacts us all. So I think we have to continue to find genuine ways to infiltrate our existing systems while we're building alternative systems, but not feel like that has to happen one at a time. It's really happening together. And I think in those practical ways around shifting policy and being, regenerative policy and practices, and that becoming the expectation, the reality, as opposed to the outlier or the fancy. What we've seen even in the space of COVID, and I hope that people haven't gotten so freaked out by some of these insurrections, that this is what happens when we stay rooted in these systems. And in fact, these are the times where we need to say, bring the spirituality back to our work and our practices, bring regenerative economies back, take it back and be for what it is and start redefining capital, redefining equity in a way that will speak to the power of the commons of land, to resiliency. And we have, and if you want to be fancy, we have reports and data that are showing that and the impact of that. We are seeing how nimble and how resilient regional supply chains, food chains, solidarity-based land models, solidarity-based community work, really connected from farm to field and farm to restaurants and farm to community, and how we shifted with each other in these unknown times, as opposed to these other systems that really weren't able to pivot the way we were. So we really just have to shift that kind of narrative and be okay with working with each other to see that impact our social, political, and natural environments. And our policy should reflect that.
Thank you. I think what's so wonderful about what you've just given us here is a sort of demystification of some of the wonkification of policy work, right? The fact that it's just kind of like, oh, like you have to be a policy wonk, when really, no, it's just about building power from resilient practices that are longstanding within the traditions that we are a part of in our local communities. And I think it's really an urgent necessity that we just dislodge this expertise laden idea that in order to actually make change, you have to be a special part of a conversation. Friends, we've got 2 minutes left here. I know that there's been a lot of wonderful conversations in the chat. I want to be respectful of people's time, both our panelists and yours all. So I'd really just kind of want to open it up to our panelists for any last words on here. Qiana gave us a lot of, and Jim, a lot of high level and also very practical stuff, resilient practices that we're familiar with should call to combine your practices of farming and gardening that are much more in tune with the spirit that we're trying to cultivate here. But I want to open it up for any other space of anything from Zach or Tim or Jim, for Qiana, for any last words.
Zach.
Well, I guess we, in the spirit of time, the only thing I would add to try to bring some of this together is that it's a what I feel like the picture that's getting painted and described is a coevolution, right? And like the answers, the questions that you raise, Aaron, have raised more questions and more inquiry. And the farm that Jim is describing and the world that Qiana are describing are gestures towards something that we're grappling with, right? And I feel very strongly that the farm is at the core of that grappling, and the farm's relationship to the community is at the core of that grappling, and that the farm and its relationship to the human being is inviting an evolution. And that evolution is a spiritual evolution. It's an evolution of seeing. It's an evolution of consciousness. It's an evolution of experiencing the earth and the gifts of the earth, and allowing those gifts to nourish you in a way where you can see more and experience more and become hopefully a better human being. So I would say that all of that language to me is an invitation, an exciting invitation, despite all of the challenges that we're all keenly aware of, that we're facing today.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim?
I just want to say really quickly, I intend to reach out to Qiana and Jim and Zach to talk more about this and to do some further stuff for but any farmer on here who would like to have a conversation about yourself and your work, please reach out to me through email. You will get a reply that I'm on sabbatical, then I'll reply to you anyway, but please do that. And also, I love the idea that Aaron's now going to convene us once a week. That would be really fun too.
Yeah, that's good. Qiana and Jim and Zach, you weren't aware of that. So here we go. No, friends, I really appreciate everyone. Thank you. Let's give our panelists a round of applause for just
wonderful.
Such a generous bestowal of knowledge here. Thank you all. I do want to remind you of one of the really important points here is that the connection to religion, religious communities, and spirituality. Tomorrow at noon, we've got a panel on religion, labor, and ecology with Dr. Jorg Rieger, Dr. Jeremy Posadas, and Dr. Rosetta Ross, who will pursue a lot of these same questions. So the notes of deep solidarity here, of intersectionality, all of this, and of building people power from the ground up will be recurring themes again tomorrow. So friends, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.